longtime Iowa journalist David Yepsen joining us from the capital city of Iowa, just in the countdown to this year's historic caucuses. We're going to spend an hour talking about times past, but also what's going to be happening this year. Let me start by asking when the Iowa caucus first hit the political radar.
The first time they hit political radar was 1972. Iowa had always had caucuses, but it was in 1972 that the Democratic Party first started operating under new rules. I always tell people the Iowa caucuses, as we know them today, were born in 1968 in the streets of Chicago when the Democratic Party tore itself apart over the war. The party decided to open up its process so more people could attend, and in doing so, in 1972, you had a series of events that go into the nominating process: the national convention, the state conventions, the congressional district conventions, the county conventions, and the precincts. And so the state party, in order to allow more people to participate, backed this up in the calendar into February of 1972, which was very early. And so that was the first year that it really became significant. George McGovern won second place. It was unexpected. And I think it's important for a couple reasons. Gary Hart, who was George McGovern's campaign manager, and Senator McGovern were looking around for a place to get some media attention and a little buzz going as the contest headed into the all-important New Hampshire primary. And it worked for them. Hart and McGovern mobilized the anti-war movement in the state, and those people turned out and finished a strong second place against Ed Muskie, who was the front runner at the time. And there were a few reporters, national political reporters, who came to Iowa to cover that. And one of them was Johnny Apple of the New York Times, who in his story one of his stories about the caucuses said that McGovern had an unexpectedly strong second place showing. So it was the first time, I think, where the expectations game got played, and we can talk more about that. But having national media, particularly someone of Apple's stature, covering this thing started to legitimize it. McGovern went on to win the nomination, and that really sent a signal that the potency of the anti-war movement, and also that there was something going on out there in Iowa that was worth paying attention to.
Well, we're going to have an opportunity to look back in history with you during this time, but before we do that, a little bit more about organization and how they work. But first, the caucus is, as I mentioned, going to be guaranteed to be historic because at the same time that the Senate impeachment trial is going on. And I'm wondering, lots of debate already in the national media and among the political folks about the impact of that on the 4 senators who are currently competing in the caucuses and what it might do to them in these last weeks of campaigning. What's it feel like on the ground, and what are the local political experts saying about the impact of it?
Well, it's unprecedented. It sidelines a good segment of the campaign. People are going to have to be figuring out ways to do things electronically. So the digital campaign will be out in full force. Campaigns are scheduling surrogate campaigners to be with them. We'll see a few spouses and children here, and it really has slowed the campaign. In addition, it's brutally cold weather, and that too has slowed the campaign. So it is a different sort of system.
All the focus this year is on the Democratic caucus, but are the Republicans going to caucus, and are there any candidates who are canvassing the state other than the president and his surrogates?
Yes, the Republicans will have a caucus, and they also plan to take their traditional straw poll There have been a few visits by William Weld, former Congressman Walsh, but they're not doing anything substantial. There's no organization on the ground for them.
Why is Iowa, from a cultural standpoint, a caucus state?
It's been that way for many, many years, going back to 1916, I believe. It's just the way that two parties have chosen to structure themselves and organize themselves. You have the basic element of government, the precinct, and that's simply the way that Iowa has always done it. It became important in 1972 when it became early, and the earliest. So it's important because it's early. It's not early because it's important.
We're going to show people a bit of a caucus from 2016. For those who haven't seen them, C-SPAN has routinely, for the past couple decades, televised caucuses in action. We're going to show a little bit of video so people can see what they are, and then I'd like you to describe exactly what a caucus is and what it does.
I am the next generation of this country, and I have $30,000 of student loan debt. And Hillary does not have a plan to help out my situation.
She has more plans than ever in everything. And it's not about raising your taxes.
But I'm not okay with the status quo anymore. I am not going to fight to preserve what we have. I'm going to fight for my future. My future is free health care and free education.
Who's going to pay for free health care and education?
The rich. We need to tax the corporations.
Everyone's going to get taxed. If you think you're not going to get taxed, you're living in a dream.
So in a local school or other kind of gathering place and a lot of discussion and debate going on, what's accomplished during a caucus?
The party organizes itself. It conducts a lot of routine business, electing committee members, central committee members, raising a little money, finding out who's active. The early caucuses are important because they're breaking down, starting to select delegates to the county convention. And this is where Iowa becomes important, because in the democratic process, this is the first state in the country where people actually express a preference for a presidential candidate and elect people to elect delegates to the county convention. And that's the first time that sort of preference gets expressed. So everyone's watching for the tea leaves. It's interesting, Susan, the term caucus is believed to be a Native American term that means a meeting of tribal leaders. And when the caucuses for many, many decades were organized, it was exactly that. It was a handful of people who were active in both parties who met in somebody's living room and talked about party business in the neighborhood, and they were the leaders. Now it's morphed into a thing where the whole tribe shows up in both parties to participate in these meetings.
A year ago, you told Politico that you thought the floors were going to buckle in Iowa when the caucus gathered because there was so much interest. Now that we're really just days away from it, what is the anticipation for how many people are going to participate, and how does that compare with history?
Well, it may be the largest turnout ever on the Democratic side. No one knows for sure. The state chair has talked that it could be more than 200,000. I've heard the figure 300,000. I think it is really a victim of its own success, that this it's important. Iowans have been told so many times how important they are, they've come to actually believe it, and they're participating. And it's a great statewide exercise in civic education. It attracts new people into the process. People show up at caucuses, and later they run for office. I met Tom Vilsack, the governor, outside a precinct caucus in 1987. So it's an entry point for people to get involved. It raises some money, although these events do cost a lot of money for the parties to stage. And it's just a great form of civic engagement that a lot of people are excited about. And given the passions that exist in American politics right now, that tends to drive turnout on both sides, particularly on the Democratic side. This campaign really ramped up the day after the 2016 election, and Democrats said, "Oh my God, we've got to do something to stop Trump." And it's been earlier and bigger than ever before.
Well, Iowa's first in the nation status is routinely challenged, often on demographics and size of the state, number of delegates ultimately selected. Make the case for people around the country. Why does it deserve to be first?
Well, it is first because that's the way the party set up its rules, and partly, I think the Iowans after the '68 convention and in 1972, they did know what they were doing in terms of setting up the earliest event. They never anticipated that this kind of thing would morph into something like this, but they did know that they'd be first, and there was in fact some talk that Harold Hughes, who was then a U.S. Senator, Democratic Senator from Iowa, was thinking about a presidential run in 1972. So there was some talk about doing this event to help him. The fact it's first continues because the country can't agree on a different way to do this, and so inertia just keeps it going. There's also campaigns who have a vested interest in this process, and they fight the next fight, even starting now. It's significant to me that Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, is going to be in Iowa before the caucuses doing a bus trip in western Iowa. He's visited the same flood twice. So we already have the beginnings of the 2024 race. And in case the Democrats don't win the White House, there's going to be about 15 people who have spent time here in Iowa as candidates, and the idea of changing the rules is not going to go over well with them. They say, wait a minute, I've got an investment in Iowa and in New Hampshire, and so they're not interested in changing the rules. And frankly, we do have a number of presidents who get there on their second go, and we're seeing a whole lot of political figures working this state hard who are going to be political leaders in America for the next generation. So they're not real interested in changing it. No one can agree on a different way to do it. And some of the criticism comes from people who lose campaigns here, who are jealous of the influence that Iowa and New Hampshire have. And so that's, it's when everyone can agree, of course, that the demographics of this state, it's a lily white state, rural, but the argument is made that that's not all bad. First of all, it did provide a big boost to the first African American president. It did elevate Hillary Clinton some with an early victory in 2016. On the Republican side, they point out that Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Cuban Americans have come forward and won. And Iowa right now with Pete Buttigieg is poised to give a big boost to the first openly gay presidential candidate. So the feeling that a lot of Iowans have say, well, yeah, we're white, but it's not exactly a hostile place for candidates of color or diverse candidates to come and work. But I think the biggest thing is, as I said, inertia. What is the alternative? And if you move it to another state, you create the same argument can be made. There are very few states that are typical. Some states, like Illinois, for example, which is often cited as a more typical state, they have a great history of political corruption, and it's not at all clear that the nation is going to concede to a state like Illinois the right to have such a big an influence when they have governors in prison and aldermen out on bond. And so I don't think the country would buy into that. And so every 4 years there's always this discussion that, this is terrible, we have to find another way to do it. The country can't agree on a different way to do it. And there are unintended consequences for other options. If you like money in politics, you love a regional primary. And what has happened in both parties to meet some of that criticism is that Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada are allowed to be in both parties as the jumping off point. And that is specifically designed to meet some of this criticism. And one more point that I think is particularly relevant this cycle. Yes, this is a rural state, but that's not a bad thing for Democrats. Because whether you like the Electoral College or not, there is a rural skew to the Electoral College. The founders set it up that way, a big state, small state compromise. And until you change the Electoral College, that's going to continue to be the way we elect presidents. Rural areas have a disproportionate influence in the Electoral College, and Democrats lost. Hillary Clinton lost in 2016 because she did not, and Democrats didn't perform well in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Even Florida has a significant rural component to its electorate. So this isn't a bad place for Democrats this cycle to come and test their message and learn about how to address the problems and concerns that rural Americans have.
So before we start looking back in history, would you tell our viewers a little bit about your own history in covering the caucuses?
Well, I'm born and raised in Jefferson, Iowa, and had no great aspirations as a young reporter other than to cover politics for the largest newspaper in the state. And I was really excited to get a job at the Des Moines Register in 1974. And as a young reporter, covering local governments, I was sort of given pieces of the 76 campaign to cover. More senior reporters were leading the charge, but I certainly had a lifelong interest in politics, and I just happened to be the right guy at the right time as this thing unfolded and my own career unfolded and evolved, which for 30-some years left me in a position as one of the lead political reporters in the state covering presidential caucuses. The joke is that David Yepsen is important once every 4 years, and then the candidates leave and he turns back into a pumpkin. And I think that's probably about right. Well,
you've left the Register a few years ago. Would you tell us what you're doing right now?
Well, I'm semi-retired. I left the Register to go to work and run the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University, an organization that Senator Paul Simon started after he left the Senate. Worked with students, taught politics at the university, taught a political writing class at the university. And then I retired in 2016 and returned to Iowa. And as it turned out, Iowa Public Television, now called Iowa PBS, was looking for someone to host a weekly news talk show that they have. And so I'm doing that now, which kind of keeps me a little bit in covering the game, but primarily I'm trying to be retired.
Well, we're appreciative that you're spending time with us for this hour. Let me start with 1976, the first caucus that you covered, and also the year the caucuses really went on the map. The Democrats, and it's all about Jimmy Carter. So tell us the Jimmy Carter story in 1976.
Well, Jimmy Carter, and specifically Hamilton Jordan, picked up on the theme that Gary Hart and George McGovern had of work hard in Iowa, do well as a springboard into New Hampshire to get money, momentum, media attention. So they came and raised the stakes. So they spent more time. Other candidates were coming here. It was the jumping off point. And I think Johnny Apple and national media particularly were paying attention. They looked at it and said in 72 Iowa was telling us something about the war and the disaffection. So the national media started to pay attention. And so you have sort of a rolling ball here. Politicians came and national media came, and that meant politicians wanted to spend more time here. And that really raised it to a much higher profile going into the New Hampshire primary. President Jimmy Carter, he didn't win the caucuses. He got more votes than any other candidate. He was, the uncommitted delegates actually got more votes, actually won the caucuses, if you will. But Jimmy Carter not only set the template and made it work, he went all the way to the White House. And that really put the events on the map. As a side note, there were also some tea leaves in the Republican side Republicans didn't do a lot of counting, but there were some estimates made of President Ford's strength and Ronald Reagan's strength as a challenger. And President Ford was he won, but it was a weak showing. And later on, in retrospect, you could see that really telegraphed that President Ford had a very weak hold on the Republican Party, and it proved out in November that he was unable to win a full term for himself. But Jimmy Carter was the one who, I think, put this on the map.
We have a little bit of video of former President Carter talking about his strategy in Iowa. We'll watch.
It would be quite difficult now for anyone to do as we did, and to campaign from schoolhouse to courthouse and stand in line and hand out pamphlets in factory shifts early in the morning, meet with farmers, make speeches from the auctioneer's desk at hog sale barns in Iowa. That's the way we ran our campaign. And if I had faced then a candidate with $20 million in the bank who was able to dominate television in New Hampshire or in Iowa or in Florida, I doubt seriously that I could have won in those states.
Do you agree?
I think that's true. It's changed a lot since Jimmy Carter was here. Some famous television footage of him working on a noon cooking show here in Iowa, cooking a fish for dinner with the host. And I mean, it was just very, it was grassroots, it was small, it was much more fun for few reporters. You could hop in the back seat of a car with a candidate and maybe an aide and drive off and have a good conversation. And now these events over the years have changed and morphed and are much different than those earlier events. They are bigger, not only because of the size, it's, as I've mentioned, it's not an intimate thing anymore, but the internet now exists in campaign. We have digital campaigning, a lot of paid television ads, but also a lot of digital media that has a big influence. And money has changed. After Citizens United, there's just a lot more money sloshing around in politics now. So campaigns don't necessarily have to be here to generate media attention, and they certainly don't have to be here to generate money. Many candidates, we're seeing two billionaires, Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, running. So some of the rules of this game that Carter laid out in '76 are starting to change.
I'm going to fast forward to 1988. There were competitive caucuses on both sides. For the Democrats, the ultimate nominee, Michael Dukakis, came in third with 22%. Likewise, on the Republican side, the ultimate nominee, George H.W. Bush, came in third with 18%. What does that tell us about Iowa?
Well, Iowa winnows the field. That's a state comment Howard Baker made in 1980 when he said he finished third place. I think Iowa winnows the field, and I've been winnowed in. So the first real function of Iowa became to elevate a candidate, as it did with Carter, or to cull the field, to cut that field down to size, and then the race moves on to New Hampshire.
Bob Dole was the winner in 1988 with 37%. Senator Dole competed a few times in the caucuses. He has credited his victories in the state to longtime Senator Chuck Grassley. I wanted to use that as a way to ask you about Chuck Grassley and Tom Harkin's influence on the Iowa caucuses over the years.
It's been enormous. They're both Senator Grassley's case, an influential senator. Senator Harkin has told me that in 1984, when he won his Senate seat, defeated Roger Yepsen, the incumbent Republican, that Harkin would not have gone to the U.S. Senate, had not won election, were it not for the organization that the Democrats built in 1984, and Ronald Reagan and the Republicans was uncontested, so they didn't have quite the organization. So Tom Harkin has said that these caucuses are of help. Were of help to him in getting elected to the Senate. But both men are big on giving advice to their fellow party members about how to campaign and issues and places to go and things to do. For the most part, I think they've stayed out of the game of endorsing candidates. I think Senator Harkin, I think he did once with Howard Dean, but they've been an important factor.
Senator Harkin made his own bid for the presidency in 1992. Can you talk about that effort?
Well, he didn't go anywhere. A lot of us wondered, why is he trying to do this? But, you know, I remembered too, I didn't get too dismissive of it because a lot of people thought Jimmy Carter wasn't going anywhere. You know, the famous headline or a story in Georgia papers that Jimmy Carter is running for what? And, you know, when I would went with Harkin to New Hampshire to campaign, people there were very welcoming. Well, come on in, Senator, have a chair. Hometown people, home state people tend to see their local person through a different lens than the people in Iowa and New Hampshire see them. And so I learned not to get too dismissive of anybody at this early stage in the game.
So by 1996, President Clinton was in his re-elect bid. On the Republican side, once again, Bob Dole with Pat Buchanan in the race. Bob Dole won in Iowa with 26% to Pat Buchanan's 23%. Would you talk about Pat Buchanan and the populist movement in the state and how it has influenced the caucuses over the years?
Well, this is the Midwest. Populism is an important strain in the politics of this region and has been since the country was started. And in Pat Buchanan's case, I think Buchanan he surprised Republicans with how strong he was, and that was a tea leaf for something to come. And I think you can draw a line right from Pat Buchanan's candidacy and his campaign straight to President Trump's victories. And in that sort of that populism. But there's also a populism on the left, too. And you saw that, for example, in George McGovern and some of Tom Harkin's campaigning. You know, that's just an important little guy, a little touch of isolationism in it that exists. It's a strain that exists in Iowa politics and in the region. And I might add, that if you look at these results, you'll see a Midwestern regional advantage for candidates in either party. You look at the names of people who've done well here: McGovern of South Dakota, Dole of Kansas, Gephardt of Missouri. There is a home court advantage for candidates from the Midwest, and I think there's probably a little bit of that too in New England regional advantage for candidates campaigning in New Hampshire.
And in addition to the populist part of the party and their appeal to candidates, the Christian conservatives have also had an important role to play in Iowa. Could you explain how?
Well, religion is an important part of American politics everywhere, and it's certainly true here. There's a religious left. If you think about it, you go back to slavery. The church and religion played an important role in the abolitionist movement. In Prohibition, the church and churches were very influential there. The anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. So I do think that religion is an important factor in politics in the state, in both parties. And on the Republican side, it's become more pronounced. Particularly, you saw that with the candidacy of Pat Robertson in 1988, where he beat George Herbert Walker Bush at a straw poll leading up to the caucuses that Republicans held, his strong showing. And that, to me, was a real key point because it brought a lot of religious conservatives into active politics. Before, many religious conservatives sort of felt that they should stay away from politics, that politics was dirty and they shouldn't get involved in it. And Robertson really started to change that and brought a lot of new people into the Republican Party. Many of them today are party leaders. But ever since that time, religious conservatives, evangelical voters on the right, have played an important role, to the point now where the criticism on the Republican side is made that really all the Republican caucuses seem to do is decide which religious conservative they're going to elevate to the nomination. And party moderates are just the thing of the past.
We're going to move to the next election cycle in 2000. The nation was just coming off the impeachment of President Clinton. On the Democratic side, Al Gore, the incumbent vice president, or the Clinton vice president, competed in the state, as did Bill Bradley, former New Jersey senator. Vice President Al Gore with 63%. On the GOP side, George W. Bush, Steve Forbes, Alan Keyes, the top three results getters in the state of Iowa. Senator John McCain bypassed Iowa that year. What should we know about the 2000 caucuses?
Well, you're starting to see this notion of 3 tickets out of Iowa. That I always say there were 3 plane tickets from Des Moines to Manchester, first-class coach and standby, because candidates were winnowed out. And if you didn't finish in the top 3, your chances were limited. You just didn't get much of a bounce there. So that was at work on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, the Gore-Bradley contest, Gore won handily. Bradley was more to the left. The issue was health care. And so what we're starting to see by that time is that on the Democratic side, while, yes, the accusation is made that the whole process pulls Democrats too far to the left to get elected in November, it's also true that among different fields of candidates, a more centrist Democrat will do well. Going back to Jimmy Carter, there were a couple candidates to his left in that 76 campaign. Gore was much more in the center than Bradley. Bradley was much more on the progressive side of things. So I tend to keep that in mind when you see a large field of candidates like we have this time. Who's carving up, who's getting to the center, who's in the middle, that it isn't always the most liberal candidate in the race who wins. In fact, it's oftentimes the most liberal candidate does not win.
So 2004, Bush re-elect. On the Democratic side, there was quite a field of candidates. John Kerry came in first in 2004, John Edwards second, Howard Dean third at 17%, and Richard Gephardt fourth at 11.2%. But there's a piece of video from the 2004 Iowa caucuses that has become iconic. I think it's fair to say. We're going to watch and have you talk about the impact of this one moment in Iowa that year.
And you know something? You know something? Not only are we going to New Hampshire, Tom Harkin, we're going to South Carolina and Oklahoma and Arizona and North Dakota and New Mexico. And we're going to California and Texas and New York. And we're going to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Yeah!
Well, David Yepsen, he's clearly having fun in that video. What did it do to his candidacy and why?
Well, I think it effectively ended it. That was too aggressive, too hot, too excited. It just did not look presidential. Remember, this was that night that he finished third. This didn't happen before the caucuses. It happened immediately after the caucuses. And I think it finished his candidacy. He'd already failed to meet expectations. You know, Governor Dean came here and on the strength of the anti-war movement surged into an early first place. But he couldn't sustain it. Other candidates started to attack him, and he wound up finishing third, and that got interpreted as a loss. In fact, I ran into Governor Dean at the convention, and he said, David, if you'd have told me when I first started coming to Iowa that I would finish third, I'd have said great. But as it turned out, it wasn't since he had been in first place, it wasn't what was expected by the political community, and so it was interpreted as a loss. And that Dean scream hurt him nationally. It's interesting, people in the hall didn't see it as a bad thing at all, but the directional microphone that he was using and what happened to it on television really made him look very non-presidential.
How do you think that moment would play in the way we practice politics in 2020 as a nation?
Well, it might be more acceptable. Everybody seems to be screaming. But I always think a candidate has to, for the presidency, has to have some gravitas to be taken seriously. There are a lot of protest candidacies, single-issue candidacies, people who have other agendas, they're trying to sell books or whatever, who get involved. But I think it's okay to be angry. You look at who's doing well. There, you could probably get away with that more now. But even so, you can't look unhinged like he did in there. And the way it came off on television was horrible.
2008, once again, a competitive caucus cycle on both sides. We'll start with the GOP this time around. Mike Huckabee came in first with 34%, Mitt Romney, 25%, Fred Thompson, 13%, John McCain, the eventual nominee, just 13%, and Ron Paul, 10%. We've got a bit of video from Governor Huckabee on election night. Let's watch, and then we'll come back and hear your analysis of what happened with the Republican race that year.
Tonight, what we have seen is a new day in American politics. A new day is needed in American politics, just like a new day is needed in American government. And tonight, it starts here in Iowa, but it doesn't end here. It goes all the way through the other states and ends at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue 1 year from now.
David Yepsen?
Well, again, the importance of the religious conservatives in the Republican Party. Huckabee mobilized them. He was a very effective speaker. Was part politician and part preacher. He came from Hope, Arkansas, where President Clinton comes from. And I remember the joke in that campaign was, "What's in the water in Hope, Arkansas?" that enables these fiery candidates to come out and do so well. And the other thing that I remember about that was really the first time the 3 tickets notion was broken, that John McCain did finish 4th and then went on to win the nomination. So that's where I say that you have 3 tickets. Now there's 4 tickets: first class, coach, standby, and baggage.
On the Democratic side, that year was the year that the turnout was the highest in Iowa history. Barack Obama came in first, John Edwards second, and Hillary Clinton in third place, but they were very close, 29.8 to 29.5%. We're going to watch some video of ultimately President Obama, but then candidate Obama claiming victory and Hillary Clinton's concession in Iowa that year.
Thank you, Iowa. They said this day would never come. They said our sights were set too high. They said this country was too divided, too disillusioned to ever come together around a common purpose. But on this January night, at this defining moment in history, you have done what the cynics said we couldn't do.
This is a great night for Democrats. We have seen an unprecedented turnout here in Iowa, and that is good news because today we're sending a clear message that we are going to have change, and that change will be a Democratic president in the White House in 2009.
David Yepsen.
What a campaign that was. First African American with a serious chance of winning. First woman with a serious chance of winning. Very tough for Democrats to sort out. And a really charismatic figure in John Edwards was involved in that race too. And there was a big question: can a woman win? Can an African American win? That winning in Iowa was very important to Barack Obama's campaign psychologically. One of the effects that it had was to signal to other African American voters that he could win white votes. And it, in fact, did move numbers in South Carolina, where over half that electorate is African American. And So that was an important, not only for Barack Obama, but also, I think, in the history of race relations and in American politics. It just it put aside this unelectability thing that was at work. I think Hillary Clinton put a big crack in the glass ceiling, even though she didn't win. But the Obama people did something really clever that really hurt her, kept her from winning. On caucus night, as we all know, people show up and break into preference groups and then allot delegates. And the Obama people wanted so badly to see that she finished third as opposed to second, because it would be much more damaging to her, that the Obama people were so sophisticated that they always had plenty of people. They'd win all the delegates they could win. They would take some of their people and send them over to the Edwards campaign, the Edwards camp, so that he would defeat her for the second place showing. A lot of anger about that, and in fact now that practice has been outlawed in the rules for this caucus. So that was an interesting wrinkle to that campaign. But I think too it really Iowans were very proud of that, and Barack Obama was very grateful for that. He carried the state twice in the general election. And in a way, where some of those tests are still going on this year, Iowa being asked to test about the electability of a woman. That's an argument that's being discussed now. And also whether the country is ready for an openly gay candidate. Mayor Buttigieg seems to be doing quite well here, and this may be an opportunity for the country for Iowa and the country to seriously contemplate the notion of an openly gay president. One
key to that caucus success for President or candidate Obama was the involvement of young people in the state. Have young people subsequently stayed mobilized, stayed involved?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a changing group of people every cycle. Some of those people in 2008 are a little older now, but that is true. A lot more younger people. It's an interesting thing to me. A lot of them gravitate to Pete Buttigieg, but Bernie Sanders attracts some of the youngest people in the campaign. You can participate if you're 17, because as long as you're an eligible voter in November of 2020. So yes, and it's refreshing. The energy, the activism. All candidates are putting a lot of emphasis on attracting younger voters. And they tend to be many of them tend to be concentrated in college towns. So one of the things that's significant is, in addition to reporting the number of delegates that a candidate wins, they're going to report the total number of people that initially show up for that candidate. And that's important because, after you win all the delegates in Iowa City, a very liberal place, and then after you win all the delegates, the next 150 people that you have really don't count for much. Now, voters will, if you show up, your preference is going to be reported by the state party on caucus night, and that'll be an interesting test because it could be confusing to people, because there'll be the initial preferences of people have when they went in, and then how the delegates broke down. In a race as competitive as this, at the top, you could see it's a real prospect that you could have someone winning the most votes but not getting the most delegates.
And since you said the expectations game in Iowa has always been an important part of the story, this could just add to that, it sounds like.
Exactly. It's just the expectations game. Candidates, you have to surprise the media. You have to surprise the political community. So you need to come to Iowa, and you need to do well, and you need to have reporters and the political community say, candidate so-and-so is doing well here, but you don't want to get it to the point where they're predicting you're going to win. Howard Dean soared initially. It resulted in attacks on him that brought him down. We're seeing that same thing being played out now in this campaign. Elizabeth Warren shot up to the top, then her campaign has sagged. Pete Buttigieg moved up, his campaign has sagged some. So campaigns have to spin reporters and into saying good things about their campaign without making predictions about who's going to win, because you don't want to come out of this like Howard Dean, who finishes third. He got one of the tickets, but is seen as a defeat. He didn't do as well as he was expected to do.
Well, back to 2012, when President Obama was seeking re-election, on the Republican side, there was an issue with how the votes were tabulated. The results that night were very close. We're going to watch a video of two of the candidates and their statements to supporters in Iowa on caucus night, and then talk about the outcome.
Game on.
We don't know what the final vote tally is going to be, but congratulations to Rick Santorum. This has been a great victory for him and for his effort. He's worked very hard in Iowa. We also feel it's been a great victory for us here, for Ron Paul as well. Ron Paul's had a great night.
So that 2012 Iowa caucus, Mitt Romney was declared the winner on caucus night by less than 10 votes. My notes say 8 votes. And then 16 days later, the victory officially went to Rick Santorum by 34. What happened, and what has the state done to fortify itself against this happening again?
Well, what happened is Rick Santorum was really cheated. He won, and he didn't get credit for it. And what is a caucus victory? It's media attention. It's money that you raise off that momentum. And to be denied that on opening night, you can't come back 2 weeks later and take back the Time magazine cover that you got. So he was really cheated, and that was, I think, a sad episode. The caucuses have always been criticized for the convoluted counting system. It's complicated. It's not a primary, which is very clean. You go in, you vote, the numbers are counted. These votes are straw votes on the Republican side. In other words, they put a slip of paper in a box and then count it. The Democratic side, it's this initial preferences and delegates. It's very confusing. There are a couple thousand precincts. There's all kinds of opportunities for counts to go wrong. And that's one of the criticisms that has been made. Both parties in the state have tried to get it right and accurate and verifiable. We live in there's not much tolerance for error in the way we tabulate elections in America after the year 2000. And so the standards are a little different than they were in 76 or in 84. In 1984, John Glenn finished way back in the pack, and the Democratic Party told me, well, we're sure Mondale won and we're sure Gary Hart came in second, but after that, we're not so sure. Well, that's terrible. They left John Glenn by the roadside when he may, in fact, have done better than the reporting. So both parties are really watched pretty closely for how they tabulate the votes, how not only and how quickly they get them, but making sure they declare the right winner. Because you can mess up a race for sheriff in Iowa and go back and get a recount and get the right person in office. You mess up a caucus count in this state, you can't go back and take back the Time magazine cover that a candidate was denied.
In addition to potential miscounts, now everyone worries about hacking into the political system and tabulation. What has the state done technology-wise to fortify itself against hacking?
Well, both parties are trying to have secure systems. They've created apps that will be used to count results and report it. More importantly, they have backup systems, so there won't be a short count that has happened in 1980 when George Herbert Walker Bush defeated Ronald Reagan in Iowa, and the Reagan people thought they got cheated because the computers went down and when Bush was ahead. Bush people say we went back and verified and we did win. But the point is the parties are trying to develop systems to provide verification and to limit the ability for someone to hack into it. It would take a very big conspiracy to manipulate those results at most points along the way, and we would certainly hear about it and see about it. But as everybody says, anything's hackable, so there has to be a kind of a separate count and a verification that the number that's reported to say on caucus night at headquarters in Des Moines is in fact what happened at the precinct. And you don't have a situation like you had in 2016 when some Republican didn't get the results in and went to bed, and you had this fiasco over Santorum and Romney and who won. So they're aware of it, Susan, but I'm not sure they'll ever get 100% ironclad system.
So on to the most recent history in 2016. We're going to start with the video of Hillary Rodham Clinton and Donald Trump on caucus night.
So as I stand here tonight, breathing a big sigh of relief, thank you, Iowa. I want you to know I will keep doing what I have done my entire life. I will keep standing up for you. I will keep fighting for you. I will always work to achieve the America that I believe in, where the promise of that dream that we hold out to our children and our grandchildren never fades.
Unbelievable. I have to start by saying I absolutely love the people of Iowa. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So on June 16th, when we started this journey, there were 17 candidates. I was told by everybody, do not go to Iowa. You could never finish even in the top 10. And I said, but I have friends in Iowa. I know a lot of people in Iowa. I think they'll really like me. Let's give it a shot. They said, don't do it. I said, I have to do it. And we finished second. And I want to tell you something. I'm just honored. I'm really honored.
So very close between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, just a percentage, not even a full percentage point there. And then Bernie Sanders went on to have a decisive victory in New Hampshire. What should we know about last go-round in Iowa and ultimately New Hampshire?
Well, the fiasco, if you will, in Iowa, that close count, is one of the reasons the rules, is the big reason why the Democratic rules are changed. This notion that everybody's vote should count is important. And in fact, Senator Sanders people believe to this day that they in fact had more people showing up for him than Hillary Clinton had showing up for her. She got a small percentage more delegates than he did, and that was what was being counted that year. So people said, well, she won. She certainly grabbed him and said, I won, and ran with that. Now that won't happen again because it really energized, I think, the Sanders people. They felt a little bit cheated, and I think that was a help to him going in New Hampshire. It's not always a good thing to win in Iowa or do well in Iowa because you become a big target in New Hampshire. Voters there like to make up their own mind. They like to say, we pick presidents here, and so I think it put her at a real disadvantage heading into New Hampshire. And on a Republican side, President Trump, Donald Trump at the time, finished in second place. He was not happy with that. He acted happy, but behind the scenes, he was very upset. He thought some people were playing some games by saying Ben Carson was dropping out of the race on caucus day, and so a lot of those votes went to Ted Cruz, enabling Cruz to win. But nevertheless, it was enough to get Trump one of the tickets out of here.
We have about 4 minutes left in our time with you. Last question for you on politics and policy. How is the economy doing in the state of Iowa? Always a factor in any decision. People go to the polls. And the state has been impacted by the president's policy on trade and tariffs. How's the economy doing?
The economy is doing well, not as well as it is in other parts of the country. A lot of uncertainty in the Farm Belt. Farm bankruptcies are going up. It's important to remember that, people think of Iowa as a farm state. Well, it's a rural state, but actually the financial services sector is more important to the state's economy. Rural America has been hit hard by bad weather, flooding, and by these tariffs. Now, the Trump administration is very mindful of that and has poured billions of dollars into aid to help farmers get through this bad patch. We all keep waiting for these tariffs, the effect of these tariffs, to turn into a bad story politically. for Donald Trump. And I don't think it's happened yet. It may, but right now there's a little more optimism in rural parts of the state that maybe the tariffs are behind the tariff episode is behind itself, behind the country. So I think the state probably leans Republican at this point. I think other observers of this feel the same way, that it has not been a fatal blow. But the challenge, what's going to change this, and in fact some of the models of the electorate show that Iowa probably would vote for the Republican. But what's changing this, and you mentioned it earlier, is the arrival of young people. If millennials, Gen Zers, iGeners, if the youngest voters come roaring into the electorate, as we're seeing that they're doing on issues like climate change, then that can change that equation. So Iowa is in play. The economy is okay for a lot of us, but there are a lot of people who are still working 2 jobs, and the growth in this state has not been what it is in other states.
So my last question is a personal one. 4 decades of covering the Iowa caucuses, what is the moment for you that is most memorable, the one that you think of all the time when you try to explain what the caucus is all about?
Oh, well, just the up-close and personal nature, particularly the access you have to candidates. I can't think of any one. I've had great opportunities, and I'm grateful for the chance to watch this unfold. It's been have great seats in the game, to see the best people in American politics, the best candidates, staff, media people, and it's been humbling to me to think I've had a responsibility in covering the early stages of a race for the American presidency. It's pretty sobering.
Well, David Yepsen, I hope you don't mind if I dub you the Dean of Iowa Political Journalists. Thank you so much for spending an hour with C-SPAN.
Thank you.
All Q&A programs are available on our website or as a podcast at cspan.org.